I knew things were about to get ugly the day a man wearing loafers worth more than my monthly feed bill stood at my fence line and asked me if I could turn the rooster volume down on weekends. I thought he was joking at first. Honestly, I almost laughed. But then I saw his face, stiff little smile, eyes already irritated like my chickens had personally insulted his bloodline. And right there, before either of us even realized it, the whole thing had already started. About 18 months later, his million-dollar winery was getting dragged online by brides, tourists, food bloggers, and one extremely angry influencer from Sacramento who said our guinea hens sounded like medieval demons being murdered in a parking lot. And the crazy thing is, none of it had to happen. My name's Eli Mercer, and my family's been farming the same stretch of land outside Rutherford County since 1984, back before people started calling farmland wine country like it was some kind of lifestyle brand. To us, it was just home. 27 acres, red clay dirt, crooked fencing my dad built with his own hands, rows of tomatoes, squash, okra, and about 40-something heritage chickens wandering wherever they pleased like tiny feathered landlords collecting emotional rent from everybody around them. Growing up out there, you learned real quick that country life ain't curated. It's noisy, muddy, occasionally smells terrible, and something is always screaming at sunrise, whether it's a rooster, a goat, or somebody's uncle fixing an engine shirtless in the driveway. Nobody complained because everybody around us lived the same way. Then the city people started arriving. At first it was harmless enough. Couples from San Francisco buying little weekend cottages, taking selfies next to barns they'd never step inside, talking about escaping the grind. But a few years back, the money got bigger. Real big. Developers came sniffing around. Vineyards started replacing feed stores. And eventually the old Bennett property beside ours sold for a number so ridiculous half the county talked about it for months. That's when Carter and Vanessa Holloway rolled into town. You ever meet people who smile like they're auditioning for a commercial? That was them. Perfect teeth, matching linen outfits, expensive sunglasses even when the sun wasn't out. Carter had sold some cybersecurity company or app or whatever tech people sell for $10 million these days. And Vanessa ran one of those social media wellness brands where every picture looks like somebody lit a candle before taking it. They renamed the property Hollow Creek Estates before they'd even unpacked a single box. 6 months later, there was a sleek black sign at the road, valet parking on weekends, and a renovated barn that looked less like a winery and more like an Apple store pretending to be rustic. I remember the first time I walked over there after construction finished. Vanessa was giving a tour to a bunch of tourists holding wine glasses with both hands like they were in church. She was talking about authentic agricultural elegance in this slow, breathy voice people use when they want expensive things to sound spiritual. Meanwhile, my rooster, Hank, was maybe 60 feet away standing on an overturned feed bucket screaming his little feathered lungs out at absolutely nothing. One of the tourists laughed. Another lady took a video. Vanessa paused for half a second, and I swear you could actually watch the irritation crawl across her face before she smoothed it back over again. That was the moment. Tiny little thing, probably seemed meaningless to everybody else standing there, but I felt it immediately. Some people move to the countryside because they love it, and some people move there because they want ownership over the idea of it. 3 days later, Carter showed up at my porch carrying a bottle of Pinot Noir and wearing that same smile. He handed me the wine and said, "Hey neighbor, got a small favor to ask." And right then, before he even finished the sentence, my stomach sank a little because deep down I already knew where this was headed. Carter stood there on my porch like he was pitching a business merger instead of asking me to change the way my family had lived for 40 years. He took a slow sip from the coffee I offered him, looked out toward the pasture where Hank and the hens were scratching around the fence line, then finally said, "We've had a few guests mention the noise during tasting hours, mostly the rooster, sometimes the goats. I was wondering if maybe on weekends you could keep them enclosed between 11 and 6. He said it carefully, polite enough on the surface, but there was something underneath it, something rehearsed. Like he'd already decided what kind of person I was before I answered. I remember staring at him for a second thinking, this man really believes silence is something you can purchase. I said, "Carter, they're free-range animals. That's kind of the whole point." He gave this tiny little nod like a manager dealing with an employee problem. "Right, of course. I just figured maybe we could find a compromise." I smiled back at him and said, We already got one. It's called county zoning law. He laughed, but it wasn't real laughter anymore. That was the first crack. After that, things got weird fast. About a week later, I got a certified letter from a law office in Napa claiming my livestock created excessive auditory disruption negatively affecting neighboring agritourism operations. I actually read that sentence out loud twice because it sounded so ridiculous. My lawyer, an old local guy named Dean Rucker who wore suspenders and smelled faintly like chewing tobacco, laughed so hard he had to take his glasses off. "Son," he told me, "their winery moved next to an active farm. Legally, this case has all the structural integrity of wet toilet paper. Turns out our county had strong right-to-farm protections. As long as my operation stayed within standard agricultural practice, they couldn't do a damn thing. So we sent back a formal response politely informing them no operational changes would be made. That should have ended it. But people like Carter and Vanessa weren't used to hearing no. First came zoning complaints, then environmental inspections. Then somebody anonymously reported unsafe manure runoff to the county. Inspector came out, checked everything, patted one of my goats on the head, and left 15 minutes later smiling. After that, Vanessa took the fight online. One night my niece Bailey texted me laughing so hard she could barely type. Vanessa had posted this long Instagram rant about outdated industrial farming practices damaging the elevated future of wine tourism. Industrial farming. Lady, I had 40 chickens and 3 lazy goats named after country singers. The comments absolutely buried her. Locals roasted her alive. One guy wrote, "Ma'am, you moved next to Old Man Mercer's farm, not Versailles." Another said, "Imagine being bullied by poultry." For a little while I thought maybe embarrassment would cool them off. Instead, it just made them meaner. The real turning point came that fall during the county planning meeting. Carter and Vanessa proposed creating a new agritourism overlay district around the valley, supposedly to protect the visitor experience. Sounds harmless until you read the fine print. Noise restrictions, livestock limitations near event venues, operational review boards controlled mostly by tourism businesses. In other words, people like me would suddenly need approval from people like them just to keep farming normally. I sat in the back row during that meeting listening to Carter talk about modernizing rural economics, while half the local farmers stared at the floor, trying not to explode. Then Vanessa got up and started talking about preserving the peaceful atmosphere visitors expect from premium wine destinations, and I swear I felt my dad rolling in his grave. Because this place wasn't built by tourists. It was built by people sweating through August heat trying to keep crops alive. Outside afterward, my buddy Leon muttered, "They don't want neighbors, Eli. They want props." That line stayed with me. A week later, Carter went on a local morning news segment wearing a denim jacket that still had fold creases in it and said traditional farms needed to adapt to evolving hospitality standards. That did it. Up until then, I'd mostly just been irritated. But sitting there watching that interview in my kitchen, hearing this man lecture lifelong farmers about adapting to tourism on land he'd owned for less than 2 years, something inside me hardened. Here's the thing people don't understand. Country folks can tolerate a lot. We tolerate weather, debt, drought, bad markets, broken equipment, and neighbors firing guns at coyotes at midnight. But arrogance gets remembered. So I decided to adapt. Just not in the way they expected. First thing I did was expand the flock. Completely legal. I picked up 30 additional heritage birds from a breeder over in Claiborne County, loud old breeds too, Delawares, Dominiques, Rhode Island Reds. Beautiful birds. Vocal birds. Then I added 6 guinea hens. Now, if you've never heard guinea hens before, imagine a smoke detector having a nervous breakdown inside a tornado siren. Those little psychopaths screamed at leaves, wind, shadows, and occasionally their own reflection. Every single sound echoed straight across Hollow Creek's tasting patio. Then came the goats. For Nigerian dwarf goats. All rescues. All weirdly dramatic. One of them, Loretta, screamed every afternoon like she was reenacting a hostage situation because she wanted apple slices. I timed feeding hour right around the winery's premium sunset tastings. Completely coincidental, of course. Around then, my nephew Cody started helping more around the property. 23 years old, Marine Corps vet, permanently sarcastic. One Saturday, he stood at the fence listening to violin music drifting over from Hollow Creek, while our turkeys gobbled like drunken uncles at Thanksgiving. He looked at me dead serious and said, "Honestly, Uncle Eli, this is the funniest war I've ever witnessed." And the crazy part was, I still wasn't technically doing anything hostile. Every animal served a legitimate agricultural purpose: brush control, egg production, pest reduction, breeding stock. If they wanted to complain publicly, they'd basically be admitting they hated normal farm life. That's when karma finally grabbed the steering wheel. The online reviews started changing. At first it was subtle. Pretty venue, but lots of animal noise nearby. Then, couldn't hear the sommelier because of screaming birds. Then came the wedding reviews. Oh man, the wedding reviews were brutal. One bride wrote, "Our vows were interrupted by what sounded like demonic peacocks." Another said a goat screamed during the father-daughter dance, and half the guests thought somebody had been injured. Vanessa tried fighting back by installing outdoor speakers around the vineyard, piping in soft classical music to drown out the farm sounds. Turns out Beethoven mixed with rooster crowing feels less like luxury wine country and more like a mental health episode. And once the internet got hold of it, there was no stopping it. Some influencer posted a TikTok from a wedding where one of my guinea hens wandered into the background, shrieking at full volume while the groom was crying through his vows. 12 million views in 5 days. The comments were merciless. Farm to table includes emotional damage. That bird has opinions about this marriage. Honestly, the chicken carried the ceremony. I'd be lying if I said I didn't laugh. Hell, even Dean laughed, and that man once sat through a tornado without changing facial expressions. But beneath all the humor, there was something uglier growing underneath it all, because by then Carter and Vanessa weren't just angry anymore. They were losing money, and people with money rarely go down quietly. By the second spring, Hollow Creek Estates had turned into the kind of local joke people pretended not to enjoy while secretly following every update online. You'd hear tourists at the diner asking, "Is this the winery with the screaming birds?" And somebody in the corner would mumble, "Depends what time the goats start up." The thing is, the wine itself was actually decent. Carter knew business, Vanessa knew branding, and if they'd just embraced the reality of where they lived instead of trying to sanitize it, they probably would have done fine. But pride has a funny way of turning manageable problems into personal crusades. They couldn't let go of the idea that they were right and the rest of us were backwards. And every month they kept fighting the land instead of living with it. The land fought back harder. Weddings started canceling. Influencers stopped tagging the vineyard. One travel blogger called the place a luxury tasting room trapped inside an active petting zoo. That article alone spread everywhere. Then came the County Harvest Festival, the moment I think finally broke them for good. Hollow Creek sponsored the main wine pavilion that year. Big banners everywhere. Vanessa dressed like she was hosting the Oscars. Local reporters walking around filming content. Meanwhile, across the road, my nephew Cody had set up a small farm stand selling eggs, jam, and homemade goat milk soap with a handwritten sign that read, "Real local farm stuff." I told him to take the sign down because it was stirring the pot. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Uncle Eli, the pot's been boiling for months." Around noon, one of my guinea hens somehow escaped the side pasture. To this day, I genuinely don't know how. That evil little creature crossed the road like it had a mission from God himself and wandered straight into Hollow Creek's outdoor pavilion during a live tasting demonstration. Full crowd, cameras rolling, Carter in the middle of explaining flavor notes. And then that bird unleashed the loudest, most horrifying shriek I have ever heard in my life. Silence froze the whole pavilion for half a second before somebody laughed, then another person, then the entire place cracked apart. People were crying, laughing. Phones came out everywhere. The guinea hen flapped onto a wine barrel, while Vanessa shouted for someone to catch it, which only made everything worse because now guests thought it was part of the entertainment. By that night, the video was everywhere. Millions of views across TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts. Somebody added dramatic opera music behind the bird scream. Another person remixed it into a dance track. Hollow Creek became internet folklore for about 3 weeks straight. And underneath all the jokes was one brutal truth. Their luxury image was dead. About a month later, I saw Carter sitting alone outside the winery long after closing. No guests, no music, just him staring out toward the hills looking like a man who suddenly realized money doesn't automatically make people respect you. I almost kept driving. Probably should have. But I stopped anyway. We stood there awkward for a minute before he finally said, "You win." I remember leaning against the fence thinking how strange those words sounded after everything that had happened. Because truthfully, it never felt like winning. It felt like two stubborn men dragging a whole valley into a feud neither one knew how to walk away from. Carter rubbed his face and said, "We honestly thought we were improving the area." There it was, the heart of the whole thing. Not greed exactly, not evil, just ego mixed with money and the assumption that newer automatically means better. I told him, "You didn't move out here because you loved country life, Carter. You moved here because you liked the aesthetic of it. There's a difference." He didn't argue, didn't threaten me, didn't even get angry. Honestly, that was the first real conversation we'd ever had. He looked exhausted, older somehow. "Vanessa hates it here now," he admitted quietly. "She says the whole town wanted us to fail." I thought about that for a second before answering. "No," I said. "People just wanted you to stop acting like the rest of us were in the way of your fantasy." We stood there listening to the evening sounds rolling across the fields, crickets, distant tractors, Hank crowing even though it was nearly sunset, because that idiot rooster never understood time. Finally, Carter laughed a little. First genuine laugh I'd heard from him since the day he moved in. 2 months later, Hollow Creek Estates quietly sold to a larger vineyard company out of Sonoma. No big farewell announcement. No emotional social media post. Just gone. The new owners surprised everybody. Instead of fighting the farm atmosphere, they leaned into it completely. They hosted real countryside weekends, partnered with local farms, sold my eggs in their market, even invited Cody to park his produce stand out front on Saturdays. And right near the entrance, hanging beneath the winery sign, they installed a smaller wooden plaque that read, "Welcome to Real Wine Country. Roosters included." First time I saw it, I laughed so hard coffee came out my nose. But here's the part people always argue about whenever this story gets brought up online. Some folks think I went too far. Maybe I did. Maybe I could have handled things differently before the whole situation turned into a public circus. Truth is, there were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd let my pride take over too. Because once you start enjoying revenge, even righteous revenge, something inside you changes a little. But then I remember my dad standing in those same fields teaching me that land doesn't belong to people who try to reshape it into an image. It belongs to the people willing to live with it honestly. And honestly, I still think the Holloways could have been welcomed here if they'd shown up humbly instead of trying to rewrite the rules for everybody else. So now I'm curious what you think. Were Carter and Vanessa entitled outsiders who got exactly what they deserved? Or did I turn a simple disagreement into something unnecessarily cruel? Let me know in the comments, because around here people still argue about it every single harvest season. And if you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe. We've got plenty more small town wars where this one came from.